In this video, we'll be talking about iron deficiency anemia. Now, before we dive into the topic, let's try to understand what is anemia. Now, in very simple words, anemia is decrease in hemoglobin concentration of the blood. Now, what is hemoglobin? And what iron has to do with this hemoglobin? To understand that, let's have a closer look at this blood vessel. Inside these blood vessels, we have red blood cells. These are the biconcave shaped red blood cells, and these red blood cells are stuffed with something very important that gives them their functionality. Now, what is this? This is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin, which is abbreviated as HB or HBG. I'll stick to HB. Now, hemoglobin structurally is a metalloprotein. A metalloprotein. Now, as the word says, what we have inside the hemoglobin is pretty simple. We have chains of proteins, and these chains of proteins have a space which is occupied by heme group. Now, this heme group is a non-protein part, and that is made up of porphyrin ring. Porphyrin is a cyclic structure, and in the center of this cyclic structure there is a pocket wherein we have ions. So now you can see that iron fits in the hemoglobin and plays a very important role in providing hemoglobin its ability to reversibly attach to oxygen. Now, what am I talking about? Now, you all must know that RBCs play a very important role in carrying oxygen from the lungs to the tissues. Now, to carry this oxygen, RBC depend on the function of hemoglobin, and this hemoglobin depends on iron for its reversible attachment to oxygen. That means hemoglobin can reversibly attach, can weakly attach with oxygen here, and can release oxygen in the tissues where it is needed. So this is where iron fits in hemoglobin. Now we can know that how iron is important for hemoglobin, and in the lack of iron there would be reduction in hemoglobin, and in the lack of hemoglobin RBCs would not be able to carry oxygen to the tissues. That being said, let's have a closer look at how iron is absorbed in the body, how it is stored, and how it is transported. Iron is absorbed in the duodenum and the upper part of the jejunum. So if this is stomach, this is duodenum, and this is the upper part of jejunum, upper jejunum. I'll mark these regions with star because this is the place where iron get absorbed. When we take in iron that is available in food, it is in oxidized form. But for absorption, we need iron in reduced form. That means it needs more of electrons to be added in there. Now, from where these electrons come? These electrons are provided by vitamin C. So here we can appreciate how vitamin C is important for the absorption of iron. Vitamin C is also called as ascorbic acid. Now, after absorption, now I'll draw mucosal cells here. These are the intestinal mucosal cells from where the iron is getting absorbed. Now, iron, while it is getting absorbed, can be stored in the mucosal cells. The storage form is called as ferritin. Now, what is ferritin? Ferritin is the combination of iron with a protein called apoferritin. So what exactly happens here is lots and lots of iron ions are coated by this protein. And this storage structure is called as ferritin. Now either the iron is stored as ferritin or it is transported to the other body cells through the blood vessels. Now, iron is not transmitted free through the blood vessels. Now, you will have a question when we have sodium transmitting free through the blood vessels, when we have potassium transmitting free through the blood vessels, why not iron? Why doesn't iron freely go through the blood vessels to reach the other cells? The reason is iron can form insoluble salts in the blood vessels, and these insoluble salts can precipitate and they are not good for life, so we do not want this to happen. So when iron is transported, again it takes help of another protein, and this another protein is called as apotransferrin. Apotransferrin. Now, the combination of iron with this transport protein apotransferrin is called as transferrin. So, it's very comparable to ferritin transferrin. Ferritin is a storage form wherein iron is combined with apoferritin, while transferrin is the transfer form of iron where iron is combined with apotransferrin to be transported. Now, the cells which receive this transferrin form of iron, they have receptors specific for apotransferrin, so that apotransferrin can attach to these receptor and can transfer the iron inside the cell. Inside the cells, this iron could be either used up by some enzymes which require iron in their structural configuration, or can be again stored here in the form of ferritin. Now, herein we are talking about the general body cells. So, this is something very general. But very importantly, iron can be transferred to red bone marrow. Now, red bone marrow is a place where erythropoiesis takes place. So, this bone is just for representation. Red bone marrow is usually found in flat bones in adults. So, transferrin, the transfer form of iron, goes to the red bone marrow wherein the process of erythropoiesis. Erythropoiesis is nothing but the formation of blood cells. Here the blood cells are forming and iron is getting incorporated in those blood cells, and you will see that most of the iron is now becoming the part of hemoglobin. So iron is getting into the hemoglobin, and now these red blood cells, they perform this very important function of carrying oxygen to the tissues, and but they have a very short lifespan. They have a lifespan of just 120 days. After 120 days, these red blood cells die and they are engulfed by the macrophages of the reticuloendothelial system. The macrophages of the reticuloendothelial cells engulf these dying red blood cells and they release iron. This released iron is again converted to the transferrin, that is a transfer form, and then it's again taken up by the red bone marrow to form the RBCs again. So this is kind of a loop wherein iron is not able to exit this loop. The only way we can think about wherein iron can exit out of this loop is when the red blood cells are lost out of the body directly. Now, how can red blood cells go out of the body? Very simply, they can go out of the body by blood loss. If the blood is lost, RBCs are lost along with the blood, and iron is lost along with the blood too. So now we have a gross summary of how iron is transported and used up in the body. We need to remember a few important things about here. One is that iron is in the food is in oxidized form. It is absorbed in the reduced form. The reduction takes place because of vitamin C. The storage form is ferritin and the transfer form is transferrin. Now, with this basic background, in the next video, we'll be talking about pathogenesis or pathophysiology of iron deficiency anemia.